And we're just waiting. I'm just seeing if LinkedIn says we're live. Okay, we are live.
Awesome. I don't see that post. You might have to share it with me so I can share it.
Yeah, let me share it really quick. Let's see here. I'm going to share it via. Sorry, I'm checking I've got it on my other computer. I pulled up on this one. Then I have access to it. Okay, here is the live URL. I'm going to share it on Zoom.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, I'll start. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the YAGNI podcast, or You Ain't Gonna Need It. This is a podcast and live stream to discuss programming, data science, cloud, and careers. Your hosts are Noah Gift and Matt Harrison, authors, instructors, and consultants who try and distill these topics down to the essentials. And we're going to be talking about education in the time of COVID-19 today. That's our topic today. And so let's get right on in and introduce our guest here. We've got Ken here. And Noah, do you want to give Ken an introduction and maybe let him give a short spiel as well?
Yeah, do you want me to introduce Ken, or do you want Ken? Do you want to just introduce yourself?
Okay. My name is Ken Gilbert. I'm formerly the department head of business analytics and statistics at the University of Tennessee. And I work now with the university in executive education and developing new programs to develop new job skills.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Ken. And Noah and I both interact with people who want to upskill and get educated and whatnot. And I know that Noah's interacted with you quite a bit. And so we thought it might be good to get you on here and talk about education and sort of look into the crystal ball maybe, or get your thoughts on that. And so as of today is May 18th, 2020. We're sort of in the middle of this COVID-19 crisis. Things have been, well, at least from where I am, things are sort of loosening up a little bit. We'll see whether that pans out or not. But a lot of people are concerned, confused, and wondering what the future is going to be like. And so I think the idea here was to address that from sort of an education point of view. And so we've got some, or I know that Ken, you've got some various ideas here. And one was that the return on investment in higher education is declining. Now, is this related to COVID-19, or is this just what you're seeing in general?
Well, I compare it to what happened to the U.S. automobile industry. In the 60s, they had a domestic monopoly. GM had nearly a 60% market share, and they were building very expensive cars that didn't get very good gas mileage, cars that didn't have the technology of the European cars, like fuel injection and disc brakes and independent suspension and radial tires, and they didn't have the quality of the Japanese imports. So they were due for a reckoning, and the reckoning happened with the oil crisis when the price of gasoline, doubled, and Toyota became the new GM. And I see higher ed in a similar situation. Student debt has climbed over the years. It's at $34,000 is the average student debt for the average student when they graduate. And then 40% of those students aren't getting jobs that require a college degree. And companies, I was talking with Noah earlier, my grandson got hired by a company, and the first thing they did was to send him off for training for skills that he could have learned in college. And tuition has been growing at 8 times the rate of wages. So something that was going to have to give. Now, along comes the current crisis. Enrollments will almost certainly be down this fall. Students will be asking a lot more about, am I getting my money's worth? Is it worth my time and money to get a degree? Particularly when companies are saying you need these skills in addition to a degree, or maybe instead of a degree. So it's a time that could determine the new winners and the new losers in higher ed. And those winners could be existing universities and college, or they could come from an entirely different segment of the economy.
Interesting. And I mean, just, we don't have to get too much into like politics or whatever, but I mean, why do you see, why has there been such a disparate growth there, like tuition cost versus everything else, inflation in general?
Noah mentioned to me something the other day called Parkinson's Law, which says bureaucracies grow regardless of the workload. And so universities have been around for a long time, and they all have very large bureaucracies. And the way universities compete or compare themselves in the rankings is based on faculty publications and faculty research grants. So they pay a lot of money to faculty to do things other than teach. So from a teaching perspective, there's a lot of overhead there that's getting passed along to the students. And so the costs keep going up.
You know what it reminds me of a little bit is the thing that you bring up about teachers not teaching. Is there was a story from the early days of the colonists that came to North America about how the Native Americans, when they were shocked to see that they were swimming with freestyle. And they're like, what is this? Because they're doing breaststroke, which is I like doing breaststroke, but it's very inefficient, stroke. And they were like, wait, you can't do that. That's cheating. You can't do the breaststroke. And if you think about, when you compare two things, if somebody is doing something that's highly inefficient, and then someone else is competing with them and doing it like the breaststroke versus the freestyle stroke, ultimately the more efficient person is going to win. And so the same thing goes with if you compare, a really good example of this is and Matt's got more experience than I have with this, is he's been teaching basically computer science, what they call computer science, for the last several years because it didn't exist at the educational system. Like there was no form of what Matt was teaching. So businesses directly go to Matt, say, hey, can you teach us the thing we would like people to have, which is how do you program in Python? Because that's what we need in our company. So it's again, like there's people doing the breaststroke, and then Matt's freestyling. He's like, and ultimately one is more effective than the other. If you're spending part of your time doing things other than teaching, you're not going to be as good as if somebody is spending their entire time teaching. And I think that's the other part about this that's very fascinating to see how it's going to play out.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting. Like to your point, Ken, you said your grandson got into a job and they immediately sent him to training. And I mean, that's what I see a lot of my clients. They're like, okay, yeah, we're going to train you. And I think we'll probably see more of that. I mean, that's just my gut, sample size one. But do you think that there will be some sort of, I mean, what's going to be like the breaking force? I mean, we're going to see universities go under, or are they going to sort of shift into like, here's a more trade oriented solution and here's just pure research? Or what looking into crystal ball, what do you think is going to happen there?
I don't know. I do know change is difficult in big organizations. And, there's just a lot of, quote, rules that universities follow that this would go totally against. Noah and I were in an earlier conversation where university faculty bristle when you start talking about vocational skills. It's like, oh, no, we teach them to think. And we teach them critical thinking skills. Lots of times we teach them to think what I think and regurgitate it on a test, but that's another story. But just as an example, I could say to you, Matt, you're not legit because you don't have an English program. You don't have a PhD in English in your program. So, there's just a lot of rules that we operate under now that are going to have to be challenged. That's the pessimistic view. The optimistic view would be change can happen in the midst of a crisis that will accelerate change. So if universities find themselves in a sink or swim situation, you could see some very rapid change. Noah and I are already seeing it happen in some places.
Yeah, it could be a forcing function for that. Now, maybe shift gears a little bit. I mean, I know to your point, universities teach you how to think, and I think all of us have college degrees. I don't regret getting my college degree. Do you think? I mean, it seems like there's some sort of like mismatch between what companies are wanting or what, we're seeing in the marketplace and what universities are offering. And I mean, full disclosure, at least from my point of view, this is, from the technology side, is there, I mean, again, that could be to, publish or die or whatever, but do you see that shifting as well, that universities are going to be more pragmatic from that side, or is there nothing to sort of, they're stuck in their ways and there's nothing that can go change there?
I don't know. It would be hard to predict. It's certainly going to put pressure on them to move more in that direction. And there's something else that's happened in recent years. At one time, the degree sort of signaled to the employer, I'm ready, or I'm what you're looking for. I've got a good GPA and so forth, and I graduated from a good school. And the employer was willing to hire you with not much expectations for what you could do the day you got there. In fact, a lot of companies have rotations where you go through one department and another department, and you spend maybe your first year and a half just learning about the company, and maybe they send you off for some training and so forth. But there was an article in, I think, the Wall Street Journal just recently. It said companies expect you to hit the ground on day one being able to do stuff. And they mentioned Amazon specifically. You need skills. You need technical skills and be able to be productive from day one. They no longer provide you the luxury of spending that first year or two letting them educate you.
Yeah. It seems that there's more competition, and I mean, personally, my experience was that where I learned the most about like software engineering skills, and computer scientists will say that, well, the computer science degree doesn't teach you how to be a software engineer. We teach you how to go into academia and be a computer scientist, right? But my where I learned the most was in my senior project class, and it was mostly self-driven with a group where we had our project and we had advisors sort of pointing us along the way, but we were sort of on our own, sort of learning on our own. And I can see that was great for learning. However, I could see that like I think that was pretty inefficient, because it was sort of the blind leading the blind, right? And if we had someone who had experience and wasn't just like letting us bounce ideas off of them, but also like saying, this is what you need to do, right? Or like, here's 2 things to do, rather than you go and figure out how this works. Choose one of these and just go do it. So, I think that's
and your bachelor's degree was computer science from Stanford. That's correct. Yeah. So I mean, that I think that's one of the things that's a kind of an interesting example, because there also has been this there's been an aura, I guess, around particular degrees, like maybe data science is one of them now. Computer science has been one where it's this. There's actually been this. I've literally had people say this, that if you don't have a computer science degree, you can't be a programmer. But then the professor says, we're not teaching you to program. So who's correct? which the person that I'm interviewing at the job says, you're not qualified, you don't have a computer science degree. Then the professor goes, oh great, I want to get it. I want to learn to be a programmer, so I'm entering your program. Oh no, we don't teach you to program. That's not what we do. So who does? Who's the person that teaches the person that wants to learn how to program to program?
Yeah, it seems like there's a mismatch there, and I mean, presumably learning to program falls out of 4 years of classes and learning about databases and compilers and data structures, and I'm not trying to like poo-poo on my degree too much. I mean, I had a great time in college, but I did feel like, even, one of the top programs in the nation, and this is 20 plus years ago, there was a mismatch then, and I'm not sure how much that has changed. I don't imagine it's changed a lot just from looking at like the courses, but it seems I'm not quite sure how you reconcile that, and I'm not sure also, I mean, Noah, maybe you can speak to this, because I don't think you have a computer science degree, like how other degrees, if there is sort of that mismatch with like what's taught and what the workforce expects.
Yeah, the place that I feel like I'm specializing in, and there's a real demand for my skills, is I am not interested in teaching people things other than skills that get them jobs. And it makes me very unique in the education space. Surprisingly, is that I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Christian, atheist. Just I don't care like about. Even though I like literature and I've read a lot of books, I used to read a book a day for years and years and years. I just don't care. I'm focused on, can I teach you something that gets you a job? And surprisingly, that is actually not as common as I would have thought it would be. And so the feedback I get is very positive, and I've had, and I would say I hear this, it does feel good emotionally to hear this from students. I hear every quarter, I hear a student tell me, your class was the one class where I learned something where I know I can get a job. It's like that's the most rewarding thing I can possibly hear from a student is something like that. So I do think some of that exists as well, where there are, you know, various reasons why people are taking classes or various reasons, but I feel like Ken's analogy is maybe one of the best I've ever heard, where if you only have a 70s Pinto with an exploding gas tank, and 8 miles to the gallon without power steering and no air conditioning, well, you'll take it. I mean, that's what's on the lot. But what is the car they really want to get into? It's probably not that car. They want something else, and that's, I think, one of the bigger ones that really is an opportunity for universities is if you really ask your customer, the student, and ask, hey, the customer, let's assume you're right, not wrong. What do you want? My hunch is, I'm sure kids want to socialize, and there's lots of fun things to do on college campuses. I had a lot of fun in college too. But if you get past that for a second and you say, what do you really want to learn? They want to learn skills that get them a job so that they can have a great life. And it's pretty simple.
Yeah. So maybe playing devil's advocate here, and either of you can answer this. I mean, if from like the computer science point of view, or maybe you should say software engineering or whatever technical side, there's a kind of running gag that, every 6 months, the JavaScript framework of choice changes or is rewritten, right? And so is it possible, or is that agility to adapt and sort of use the latest and greatest, is that possible? Or, I mean, we're sort of at one end where we say that, you can't, we're stuck in the 70s Pinto style, but do we have to do Tesla today and then next gen of Tesla, in 6 months? How do you sort of balance that out?
I certainly have an answer, but you want to answer first, Ken?
Well, I can tell you some of the things that do work. We have a business analytics forum where the people in industry that hire our students come there to share best practices and tell us, what skills they need and everything. And that influences our curriculum quite a bit. And they tell us things like, Noah and I were talking to a group of people from industry last week, and they said, we really like certifications because they tell us exactly what the student can do and what they can't do. And if we don't want to hire an intern that's going to take up somebody else's time all summer to show them how to do the project that we assign them to. So if that intern has a particular certification, that tells us we can assign them to that project, and we already have evidence that they have the skills needed to do that project.
Awesome. Yeah. So some sort of finer grained, rather than you took class A or B, we actually know that you have skills X, Y, or Z. Yeah.
Well, and I'll follow up on that. In that, I think if you look at the sports analogy here, and you said, because I know actually all three of us have done. You've done marathons too, Ken, right? Your distance, So all of us have done marathons, and I would say the analogy is more like that. Is if you, it's true that if someone did a marathon, it would be different than asking them to, I don't know, hike up a mountain or something like that, or go swimming or go on a bike race or something like that. They're very different. If you said, well, look, if you taught someone to run marathons, well, the new sports are going to change all the time. I would be pretty confident that if someone ran a marathon, you could pretty much teach that person any other sport, because that took a lot of self-discipline to run a marathon, and that person is in great shape. If you finish a marathon, you're in great shape. And so most likely you could throw them into literally basketball, tennis. they do okay. In fact, I've seen this before. There was my track coach in high school. He never played basketball ever, and he was a marathon runner and like sprinter. He was like really, really good at track, even in his 40s and 50s. And I remember they played like a alumni game, and he just blew away everybody. And he was very uncoordinated as well. Like could barely bounce the ball, but he didn't get tired. It just ran up and down the court and just scored all the points. so I think the crossover of teaching someone how to build software, I think is actually part of the educational experience. And once you learn how to build solutions, then you'll know how to build solutions later when technology changes.
Yeah. So if we're saying like certification is important to a lot of companies, I mean, at that point, do we just change everything from universities to sort of trade schools, or what do you think the takeaway there is, Ken?
I don't know, but I agree with Noah's point. You don't necessarily have to train them in a specific skill, hoping that what you train them for is going to match what the market needs. It certainly won't be what the market needs 5 years from now. But having demonstrated the ability to take on something that's really hard, like a marathon that seems impossible when you first start running, and going through that process is really is. I've just read the book Grit, or I'm reading it right now. There's another book called Unlimited Mind, and both books are saying what predicts success, whether it's camps, students or cadets in boot camp at one of the academies or whatever, is having tried something really hard and succeeding in the past, or understanding that something that looks impossible is doable if you're willing to put in the effort to do it. So maybe that, it's, I don't know exactly what the solution is. I know we have veered way too far in the other direction. I've know people in local industry here that years ago, when all they needed was Fortran programmers, they had better success hiring people who had a degree in music but had learned how to write Fortran code at the local junior college or somewhere else, or somebody that had a degree in phys ed than somebody that had a degree in computer science. And so there's some gap there that needs to be addressed.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. That's a very good point you bring up. I remember people saying that about Python. So, in 2000 was, and Matt and I already talked about kind of how we got started, and I just through peer pressure started learning Python. It wasn't that I was learning to program in Python because I thought I would get a job or anything to do with that. It was just something I did because I felt like I needed to do it, and my friends were doing it, and I was kind of pressured into it. And if you learn a skill on your own time, then it says something about you, and it says that you're the kind of person that learns new things without directly being told, learn this new thing. And that's the part that is interesting, that education is still struggling with, is this idea that what you should do what you're told, and that's how you actually get prepared for the workforce, is just do what you're told.
Yeah, I mean, to further on that analogy, I've been watching The Last Dance, which is, if you're not familiar with that, it's this documentary about Michael Jordan and his, I guess, antics. But one of the episodes was talking about how when as the Bulls, his team was improving, they played against this team, the Detroit Pistons. And at the time, the Detroit Pistons were the bad boys of basketball. And basically, they were a bunch of bullies, for lack of a better word, really strong. And they legitimately said, like, when Jordan comes down, don't let him get off the ground. And if you can, knock him to the ground, right? I mean, just like really hard fouls and, elbows and crazy stuff like that. And after they knocked out the Bulls that season, apparently, like, Michael said, okay, they're stronger than us, they deserve to win. And he immediately, instead of like taking the summer off, he immediately went to the gym and started working out, right? And I mean, say what you want about Michael Jordan or whatnot, but I mean, there's a work ethic there that I've seen as well, right? Where you have someone who wants to do something of their own accord. And I guess you could sort of say that for like someone who's written a book. Like, if you know someone's written a book, then that says something about them. Not necessarily that they're rich and famous per se, but they've sort of done the marathon, right? They've put in the work. And a lot of people who are writing a book aren't necessarily getting compensated for it equivalent to what they put into that. So it says something about their work ethic. And I think, maybe there is an issue in education where it's like, hey, what does the teacher tell me? I'm just going to sit down and do what the teacher tells me, right? And I think the environment we live in, at least from the tech side today, is that you basically need to be constantly able to adapt and evolve and learn. And I don't know. I'm not sure that there are good metrics for that right now for that, but I like your point of, here is a project that is something where you have worked hard on it, and it's not necessarily that your teacher walked you through it per se, but it demonstrates that you have the ability to do something hard that's relevant to what we're looking at. So yeah. Here's another.
I'll say.
Oh yeah.
I'll say one final thing. I in the shower this morning, I had this thought about about grades, and I was wondering if they could, if instead of having just A, B, C, D, E, F, if you also could have maybe like an E. And an E would be like basically exceptional, and the exceptional is you didn't do anything I told you at all. And you actually did something even better, and I didn't even know what you're doing, but I should have known that this is what I should have told the students to do. Like, basically an unexpected, exceptional thing that is almost, even if you disobeyed exactly what the teacher said, like, hey, wait a second, I didn't ask you to do this at all, and you get the best grade in class because it's better than what I told you. Like, just that concept doesn't exist in the educational system. Anyway, that was the last thing I thought about.
Yeah, I mean, I have an example of that. My brother, when he also has a CS degree, and when he was doing his degree, he was doing a graphics class, and it was all 2-dimensional, right? And he's like, oh, I want to do a 3-dimensional game. So he went out and taught himself OpenGL and learned how to make a 3-dimensional game that still fit the requirements of what everyone else was doing, but was sort of a step or two above, just because to do OpenGL, you have to understand linear algebra and a lot of math, and it's when you add in that extra dimension, it makes things a little bit more complicated than 2 dimensions. So yeah, I think.
Did he get an F?
I think he got an A in that one.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think evaluation is another thing, and we could probably go off on a whole other tangent on evaluating students and those sorts of things. So we're seeing like universities here. What are some of the other competition, Ken, that you're seeing, or how do universities compete, or where is the value of the university these days then?
I don't know. There's certainly other places where you can learn skills. The online courses that you can take. There's some things are missing there, and the reason I say that is they all consistently have fairly low completion rates, usually in single digits. And so, what encourages a student is to be able to have a peer group that they're working with. What encourages them is to have a faculty member that's encouraged them, that's setting deadlines so that, whatever it is they're doing is not last on their list of priorities. They need opportunities to ask questions. When I get stuck, I don't need to waste 2 hours trying to figure out that I left a comma out of a statement when somebody could just look over my shoulder. And so there are a lot of things that universities bring that some of these other platforms don't have. So there's a lot of opportunities for partnerships there. And the universities have spent years building connections with industry and their placement office and all of that. They've spent years developing recruiting and admission procedures and so forth. So there's a lot of things that universities can do that add value, but their weak spot is they're not very agile, and they tend to be internally focused. The curriculum quite often reflects the interest of the faculty more so than the current marketplace. So, and the people on the outside are the opposite. They have to respond very quickly to the marketplace, and they have to be agile in getting new content. So there's some big opportunities to partner there, and there may be all sorts of different options. I can go to the university, or I may be in a 1-year program. By the way, it doesn't take 4 years to learn everything. I mean, if I become a architect, I probably learn most of my skills in 1 year, and it's probably the first year on the job. I'm not an architect, so I don't know. I'm just making up an example. So, but there are partnerships. There's the private sector is out there. They're always looking for ways to make a buck by providing relevant training, and so you probably will see growth in that part of the educational space. Go ahead, Noah.
To follow up on what you're saying, the part that I think is fascinating to look at is as you mentioned, the cost of education has gone up. What is it? 8 times higher greater than wages. Was it in the last 20, 30 years, something like that?
I think it's the last decade.
And then if you look at, I know there was a bunch of information about this at particular UCLA, which is probably very similar to many other universities. It's administrative headcount, right? So you're adding all these administrators, and the government has, the United States has created a system that makes it impossible to discharge student debt at the same time. So you have that's the part that I think is very fascinating. If you look at some of the disruptions that have occurred recently with brick and mortar institutions, like malls are pretty much gone. You look at the taxi industry that went belly up, and then because of the fixed cost is just so incredible that they just really, there's no reason for them to exist anymore. And if what a university does is it has brick and mortar institution with a high physical fixed cost plus essentially unchecked growth of headcount, which also raises the cost. And in addition to that, it's illegal for the natural things that happen in a marketplace to have an escape valve, which is that if you're producing a bunch of students that have a degree that costs $200,000 and they can never get a job, they're all going to go bankrupt. And then eventually that's going to come back to you, and you're, as the university, you can't support that degree anymore, and you'll make changes and you'll reduce costs. So I think that's the other part too, is that even before COVID-19, you actually had all these factors, physical location, headcount that's explosive in terms of the growth. You can't discharge the debt. And then even on top of that, the thing you mentioned, which is it 4 years or 1 year? One of the things I've seen in my life is things that are linear often get disrupted. So a good example is I worked as an editor in television with linear editing systems, and it was physical tapes, and you put the physical tapes in, and then they became digital. And then it was like, wait a second, and now in fact it's just a laptop. There was hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment for doing physical editing, and this concept that everything has to be a linear 4-year degree in a physical location with hundreds of people, and then it's a monopoly where you basically, or cartel essentially, where you can never get rid of the debt. If you just put all those things together, it seems very unlikely that we're going to escape the next presidential cycle without some kind of a bubble bursting there. Those things just are not sustainable, right? There's just no reason those things all together can escape some kind of escape valve. Like if you've seen this with steam or water, if you put it into a fixed container, it'll find the weakness, and eventually you see it so I think there is going to be something very dramatic that will happen probably this year. That's my guess. I could be totally wrong.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I've heard of some students who are taking like a gap year, so who have graduated this year, and who are like, I don't even know if my college is going to be open in the fall, so what's the point if that is the case? So it'll be interesting to see also like the political pressure to push colleges to open as well, right? Because I think there's a lot of pressure to say things are normal, and we want things to be normal here. So we'll see what happens on that. Now, one thing that I mean, we can rag on universities a lot, but I do think there is something to be said for completion rates, right? Because I mean, I've done consulting for companies that do online learning in these large MOOCs, and the completion rate, to be frank, is pretty abysmal, right? A lot of them you get very low percentiles of people who complete relative to like a college or university class. So I think, for the competition, that's something of a challenge to get the buy-in, right? I mean, there is something to be said, like, I'm committing the next 4 years to this, and so I'm sort of bought in, and I'm also paying for it. So either out of my own money, and I'm going to take out loans, or mommy and daddy are paying for it, and so I got to do this, right? I mean, there are dropouts, but relative to like MOOCs, completion rates are much better in the university. So, I mean, for some of the competition, that's something to be aware of. But I think there is value in that, and so that's one of my concerns with the if we see some sort of a lot of universities saying, well, our value is not in the college experience, it's in the education, and then we go to these online courses, everything, will that cause a big sort of disintegration in that, okay, well, we're only getting 20% of people doing this now, we're going to have to like bump up our tuition because we have so many people drop out, or what's going to happen on that? Do you see something like that happening, Ken, or is that sort of not even
there's
a concern?
A couple possibilities. Some universities like Arizona State have already built a very successful distance learning program. You can get practically any degree that they offer online, and they made it affordable, and they made it available to people who are working and single moms, and they've been very successful at that. So they're, those universities probably, if I were a student and I say I'm not able to spend $20,000 or $30,000 a semester to go to whatever, that kind of program might be very attractive to me. And the other thing that you hear mentioned is there's going to be a big temptation by universities that are elite and turning down 90% of their applicants to say, hey, we could admit a few more online. And they get, we've just learned how you deliver stuff online. And maybe the students have said, we've learned how to do courses online. So, that may cause a shift in the demand, among the universities, and to determine some new winners and some losers. And then there's always the industry side. What the industry decides you need in order to work for us. And that'll have a lot to do with it. Apparently, a few years ago, companies realized they didn't need nearly as many people with law degrees as they'd been hiring. So the demand for law degrees went down and the enrollments dropped down. And same has happened apparently with MBA degrees. Some fairly large MBA programs have closed down because they're all competing for a smaller group of students. And the companies are saying, we're not willing to pay a premium for somebody to get an MBA degree. So the market may determine what happens.
Interesting. Do you see a difference with public versus private schools, or how those react?
I don't know. They're all going to be stressed financially. Enrollments are down. Their endowments are going to be down. If they're public, the funding from the state is going to be down. So they're all going to be facing financial pressures, and how they're going to be reacting, I don't know. But they seem to have the same problem.
Yeah.
Well, with the state system, though, it is kind of an interesting one, and because I've worked in the UC system, and I'll be honest, I think the UC system could be streamlined. So I guess I'm not being too brave because I don't really work with UC as much anymore. But if you look at there's the salaries, in my opinion, are way in excess of industry norms. And the amount of people making these really high salaries, and part of it's just California is a very wealthy location. People pay one of the highest state income tax rates, but I think there's a period where the taxpayers of California will go, wait, hold on a second. So you can't even pay TAs enough to live. They're homeless, but I can pay the head of the UC $750,000 a year, which is triple. What is it? President of the United States, what is $250, right? So it's, I think, let's just say roughly 2 to 3 times what the president of the United States makes, plus housing, plus expenses, plus all. And then, of course, that person has lots of people underneath them. That if you just kind of total all of it together, if a private university wants to do that and they're successful, in my opinion, whatever, you make triple that, whatever you want to do. But if you're taxpayer funded, I don't think that really is going to make a lot of people in California very happy, because while you're suffering, your tax dollars are going to, these kind of outrageous salaries. So I think that also could have some pressure, especially when there's income inequality within the if it's a public good. In the case of University of California, in theory, the word California should be a tip off that you're helping the residents of California get educated. And if you're exploiting, in my opinion, there's exploitive wages to the TAs in the UC system, and then you're getting these outrageous salaries. I think that's you're ripe to also get some modifications to what's happening to that state university system. So if I was in charge, if I was the governor of California, which I'm not, I would definitely restructure the UC system and do caps on administrative salary, administrative headcount. I would make it illegal to pay people wages that weren't livable wages that were part of the university system. And that's my opinion. I don't speak for the UC system, but that's what I would do.
Interesting. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what falls out there, and sort of, I mean, I think it's going to be another year before we see the results of sort of this fall, what goes on. But yeah, there could be some interesting fallout from that. Okay, well, I think I'm out of my questions here, Ken. Noah, what do you have?
I think maybe, yeah, the final thing to say potentially about the educational system is that on one hand, it's dire and there's all these bad things. There is going to be disruption, but it does feel, I think Ken really nailed it again with another point he made, which is that I do think some of these universities, especially top universities, I think are going to move very quickly. And what they're going to realize is they're probably going to just scoop up all the oxygen. And if you're not a top university, if you're not in the top 10 or whatever, then you potentially also could come in there and be like the smaller fish that's like getting all the extra food out of the big whale's mouth. But for sure, that's been my, I have a little bit of insight here because I'm working with top universities that I think they are going to come in and they're going to scoop up a lot of the food. And for the universities that can be really agile and get in there, this is really your opportunity to do something big quickly while you can.
What closing thoughts, Ken? What do you think?
I agree with what Noah just said. I've worked with some of the airlines, and in the last 2008 recession, they were all near bankruptcy. And what a lot of them did was outsource their maintenance and their repair and their overhaul work because they didn't see that as part of their core mission, I guess. And what Delta did instead was they streamlined their maintenance and repair and overhaul facilities and made them a lot more efficient. And they started bringing in business from the other airlines. So we're probably going to see a fruit basket turnover here, and the people who understand what's going on and respond accordingly will be the winners.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what plays out. I mean, in general, in a marketplace, you'd see something like some sort of mergers and acquisitions. I don't know how that plays out in the university system.
I just saw one happen the other day. Some college went out of business and just turned the whole thing over to somebody else, some other college. So you may see some of that.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, thanks for being with us, Ken. That was awesome to talk with you and get your insight into what's going on. I mean, I have a daughter who will be attending college this fall, so it'll be interesting to see if she's actually at college or still at home attending college. But it's interesting times that we live in. Any closing thoughts, Ken or Noah, before we sign off?
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah. thanks for being on, and we appreciate your time. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.
Talk
Bye.
later. Bye.